Hi everyone, and welcome to this weekly Wednesday live stream. I'm Tim Von Rieden, better known as Von Art Online, and I do these weekly Wednesday live streams to discuss art, show you techniques, and just have fun along the way, and maybe give you someone to draw alongside with, because it's something that really helped me back when I was in college, just having other people around me while I was working. So today's topic was actually something that was requested last week, and it is to show you guys how do I draw a head in profile. Or better yet, what are like the constructive ways to draw a head in profile? And that's something that I'm a little familiar with because I feel like a third of everything I draw is basically a person in profile. So might as well do a tutorial on how I do that. And first, actually, you know what? I'm going to look up some examples in my little book here. But while I'm doing this, I want to do the little announcements. Basically, next week we are having I believe next week is the critique stream. So if you want to be live critiqued by me on this Twitch stream, you can go ahead and submit your image to the Discord community below. There is a chat room separate just for that. And I will be doing probably around 6 to 8 live critiques next week. Or if you're someone that just likes to come to critique sessions and you learn a lot just from listening, next week would definitely be a good one for you to pop in on. And speaking of which, our Discord community is a very active, growing community. I feel like I'm really trying to push it to be this community of people that are working artists that are trying to better themselves, learn from one another, and share references or things that have helped them to help the artists within the community as well. So if you want to join that, there is a link below. And the wonderful mods that are on there will help you in case you need some assistance. Here's all my swordplay characters in profile. Nextly, I have a Patreon thing going on right now. So I relaunched Patreon and I've been printing out all of my collector prints. You can kind of see it there. But essentially, it's my print with all the hands. And I have been individually having a key that I draw on the bottom of every single print. And I think my assistant Kat packed all of them up already, so I don't have an example of them out. But man, drawing keys for like an hour was very interesting, and having each key try to be unique and different was a challenge a little bit. But I love drawing keys, so it wasn't that bad actually. Here's another double profile there. And let's see, what other little information do I have? Oh, and if you sign up for my Patreon by the end of January, you'll get that print for free in the mail, and I will send it to you. And that is part of my relaunch of my Patreon. And you get to see that along with I'm writing and illustrating a book at the moment, and you get to read the first chapter that I officially have finished. Sounds like almost a full profile, but I feel like his head is slightly turned. I feel like that's most of the announcements I have. Oh, and lastly, on our Discord channel, we have a contest going on right now. We are looking for more emojis to be involved with the community, and I will be picking 5 of them, of the user-created ones, to become permanent on our Discord, which is kind of exciting. It's kind of worrisome to see what you guys come up with, but I decided to add one to kind of start the emoji craze, and it is of my stepchild Astrid. She is a cat that I never thought I would like cats, and lo and behold, I have fallen in love with cats. There's one more. So I draw a lot of profiles, I guess is what I'm trying to say with looking through my old work. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and jump into this. So I'm literally working on a drawing that has 2 people in profile, and I thought this would be a good example to use my vellum paper. Or I should say Duralar. It's like the weirdest word. It's Duralar. But whenever I see it, I'm like Duralar. And it's just this clear translucent paper that I like to paint on with a paint marker. And it is a good way for me to show you guys kind of what's going on underneath the drawing. Well, I thank you, Danny Savna, for following. And this way, I almost feel like a teacher back in grade school. I don't know if you guys ever had this with projectors, and you'd have these clear vellum sheets, and you would come up with the markers and write the answers on them or whatever it might have been. So it always feels very strange for me to be working with these. But as always, I wrote down some notes that I'm going to go through with you guys on how I draw profiles. I'm going to first explain the construction of them, and then I'm going to go into actually drawing a few examples and how I like to do them a little quicker. Because for me, drawing profiles, I don't even really have to think about it anymore because of how many I've done. That's not to say that I still shouldn't be looking at reference from time to time. I think there's a level of arrogance that an artist can get to when they become like too comfortable with what they're drawing. And I'm always actively aware of trying not to do that. So I got to remind myself to also practice from time to time. Well, I thank you, Miek, for following. And if you guys have any comments or questions along the stream, please ask them in the comment section with @vonart before it. That way it's easier for me to see it when I'm looking up and down between the comment section and what I'm working on. Okay. So I'm going to start right away. When you look at someone's head in profile, and mind you, this is a drawing, but usually there are a few things that stick out. And actually, I wanted to also talk about, as I'm like jumping around already, what I see a lot of artists do wrong. Yeah, my little mermaid that I was going to draw. Because you know what? Before even getting into construction, I think it's good to talk about what I feel artists do a little wrong when drawing profile. And I'm going to work with, I'm just going to do mechanical for the time being. Well, I thank you, 444R5, for following. So the first thing I see a lot of artists do is when they're doing their profile, they draw these circles, and then when they're drawing their head, mind you, I'm like trying to purposely draw bad, so this is a bad example. And they're like trying to edit it, they're trying to really get it, but something doesn't seem to be right. And they're like trying to put the neck in, but it looks really wrong. So a lot of this obviously is like an underlying construction problem, and they're not really knowing proportionally where things are supposed to be, which I will talk to you and explain where they should go. But the number one thing is putting facial features too much in the middle of the head. I think too often we think of people and characters when we see them drawn. We see the front of their face for the most part. Even if it's slightly turned, we see all the facial features kind of taking up and encompassing the entirety of the head because oftentimes we're seeing it straight on. But when you go to a full profile, I know I'm wearing a hat and everything, thanks to my nest hair today. But when you go full profile, the actual features of the face are literally like pushed to the edge of the third of the face. And that's something I'll talk about, how you want your facial features, especially in a true profile, to be in the last third section of the face, because we're going to be splitting the head into threes, not only vertically, but horizontally. And I'll explain where facial features for the most part will go. Because obviously there's people, everyone has different features for if you have like a really long nose versus a really short nose, if you have more of a thicker nose or a skinny one. Things will vary depending on the person that you're drawing or trying to capture. But I'm going to give you a general guideline of where features are generally placed, and then it's up to you to kind of distort them or break it to make it fit the style that you're going for. So my number one thing is seeing the eye too far back. And the second thing would be to have all your facial features kind of smushed. And I think too often I see the profile that kind of looks like this, where there's nothing. Like, what is this? This is a piece of string that fell on a white floor. And I want to kind of push you to not exaggerate, but be a little stronger with the momentum of the face and allowing the nose to jut out a bit more and allowing even the lips. I think too often we try to like smush them in, but usually there's a little bit of a little gap, a little divot that the lip creates, and too often that's forgotten or overlooked. So this would be the next thing that I would say is a no-no. The third one is not knowing what the heck to do with the neck. And I'm not gonna go too much into anatomy and muscles on the neck area because I think that could be an entirely different stream. But the one thing I will say is, let's say you draw your face. Then when you're going into the neck, I think too often people draw necks that go almost straight down. This is not what I want you guys to be doing. Instead, I would rather see, I'll do like little tick markers. Most people have a little forward push to their neck. And in doing so, their neck is going to be at a slight angle. And it should look like this. And I'm not going to teach the angled line way of drawing. I think there is a lot of benefits to that. And especially when I was in school, you see a lot of angulars with the chin and triangulating where the eye should go, all that stuff. Why, thank you for following. But I'm going to go a little more basic with what I'm going to teach. And then if you want to take it from there and do these angles and lines, I think that's good too. Explore and maybe see, does this help me more? But I'm going to show how I draw profiles and what seems to work for me. Not to say that mine are perfect, because there are definitely times where I draw something, I'm like, oh, that does not look like a head in profile. And that will happen from time to time. But you want to give yourself the most tools that could benefit you when you're drawing, especially if you're drawing something that maybe you're not 100% comfortable or even familiar with. And that's what these type of streams are for. So those would be probably the number one things I see. Oh, and the head being way too circular. I think people, at least when I went back to go teach at my college, a lot of the skull shapes that they had were very circular, when really it should be more of like an oval. But we'll talk about that more in the actual construction. So, leads me into the first thing that I want to talk about, and that is when you are drawing any type of person, any type of anatomy study, anything that relates to a human, really should be looking at the underlying anatomy and the underlying muscle structure, including the bones, maybe the veins if you're nuts like I am and are interested by that kind of stuff. But if you don't know what is underneath the actual skin, I feel like more often than not, the character and the poses that you create often are really stiff. And they don't really feel like people, as more they do feel like this weird, almost like shapeless mannequin. And you got to remember that we are organic forms, and our skin can stretch, and we can pull and, you know, distort our muscles a little bit. Well, thank you, MDBR, for following. And if you're not looking at if you're only looking at the skin and trying to recreate that in your own drawings, I think it'll hurt you in the long run. So the first thing I would do is really study the skeleton. This is something that we did back in college, and it was basically, instead of having a life drawing model come in, we would draw skeletons, and we would draw them sitting and standing in pose. And you kind of got it after a while that the reason you want to study the skeleton is because if you can draw the skeleton in a pose, you can draw a person in a pose. It's just layering things on top of the skeleton, which will then compose the human body. So my first piece of advice would be to really look at a skeleton and understand it. I'm not saying you have to draw every single rib of a rib cage every single time, but you can simplify it and do like a simple skeletal structure, which would look something like, and I remember doing these so often. Start with the backbone, should be the backbone of your drawing. And then I do a kind of simple egg type rib cage, and then where the shoulders are, the one bone representing the top bone in your arm, and then usually this kind of break apart and pull back together where the bottom, the forearm bones are. There's two of them, main ones, prominent ones I should say. And then fingers, I tried not to give too much attention to either. Hips, I would do 2 ellipses. And then something important, I know this is kind of venturing into anatomy and skeletal structure, but remember that your leg bones actually start on the outside of your hip bones. So that was always a good lesson for me, to kind of pull your legs apart from one another. And then you can draw that really long bone that juts out of your hip. 2 lines for the lower leg bones, and then your feet. So essentially, that would be how I would draw my skeletons really quick. And then they would say the next test that you would do is after you drew your skeleton, you would then be asked to draw your muscle structures on top. And that's where get a little more detailed. All of a sudden the lower legs have quite a bit more meat on them because there's so many muscles going on down there. And then the calves, which are really interesting and fun to draw, especially once you know the muscle structure. Some of them are really fun for me to draw, like the muscle that's above the knee and it's like split, and it's like these weird 3 teardrop shapes that work together to create the muscle structures there. And that is, I don't know, that was kind of always just fun for me to draw back in the day. So anyways, the whole reason I'm even doing this example is because I really do believe in what the teachers talked about, where it's understanding the skeleton, laying down muscle, and then do skin. And that way you'll just have a better understanding of proportion, and if you can pose a skeleton, you can pose a character. So anyways, with the skull, the main thing that I guess I want to point out is, and where's my second chart? I'm going to do this one. Basically, if you cut the skull completely in half on a complete side view profile, and if you did a vertical line going down the center, all of the facial features are in, not only in the front, but they are like close to the front. And I divided them again in thirds. Let me pull this sheet back up like that. And basically this is showing, let me move this down for you guys. And this chart is to show, like trying to touch it and move it just a little bit. And it's trying to show that all the facial features not only are in the front half, they're in the front third. And the purple lines are literally splitting the head in 3 sections. And the facial features are all in the front third, where the eye socket is, where all the teeth are. And if you really think about your nose and look at a skull, it's weird to think that the bone in the nose is like this weird broken looking bone, but that's how it is. And then this is all just like cartilage in the front. But all of that is in the front third. But I don't want to talk about the vertical sections yet. The first thing I want to talk about are, or no. Let me look at my notes really quick. Oh, basically, the main thing I want to talk about with the skull is it is a bumpy, weird, clay-shaped object. And it's not this perfectly round, bowling ball-looking sphere, which I think a lot of, at least artists that aren't familiar with underlying anatomy structure, tend to see the skull as. And I want you to think of it more as like a fruit, almost like a watermelon or something that is not really an egg. An egg is too hard and sturdy and like almost perfectly shaped. When I think of a skull, I think very bumpy, very just it's not perfect. And I think too often we want these very clean, structured skulls, but in reality they're very bumpy. There's a lot of noise, especially like where those little cracks are. And I wanted to, even with a marker, just kind of pay attention to those and how imperfect a skull actually is. And then with I don't want to get too much in the neck. I feel like I want to explain the whole body so bad, but I feel like I'm going to save that for another stream. So instead, I'll just say, with the skull, just know that's imperfect. The jaw can basically be detached pretty easily, and you can think of the skull as like this very prominent oval shape on the top, and then a little boxy type shape underneath it. And that's how you can simplify it. So if I were to pull up, let me grab a little post-it note. So if I were to look at the skull and try to simplify it, it'd be like an oval and then a boxy shape under it. So this is a very simplified way to look at drawing a skull, but you kind of learn as you're drawing characters over and over again that you want to simplify things a lot before you add any kind of detail, especially any kind of like rendering detail. You really want to get your forms laid down first, understand the anatomy, the pose, proportions, and then you can start worrying about what they're wearing and go from there. So we're going to break down a lot of things into the simplified forms today, and we're going to keep it going that way. Okay, really quick, let me look at the questions here. Jim says, how does Gen Con compare to Dragon Con? I might have an opportunity to go to one of them. I think both are wonderful. I would consider both of them part of my big 6 cons of the year. And Gen Con is more board game focused, but it's a lot of fun. And Dragon Con is bigger, but they're equally wonderful. So I would, if you can go to both, definitely go to both. Hello, everyone. Tijel says, you might hate me for this question, but what gender is this person that Nate is snuggling up to? I get a very androgyny vibe. It is a boy. Oh, boy. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to talk about are the 3 regions of the head. And you know what? I'm going to take away the skull just for a second, just so we can see this a bit more clearly. So when we're looking at the 3 regions of the head, there's basically, let me move this up a bit. It can be simplified very quickly in the fact that the first third of the 3 regions would be the forehead, which I know sounds really boring, but essentially where your hairline starts and it goes to the top of your eyebrows. And these 3 regions, I should have prefaced this with, you know what, let me start over with the 3 regions. When you look at someone's profile, if they shaved all their hair and they were just bald, you could divide the head features in 3 pretty much equal regions, and they would be, this is pretty much similar on everyone, but the 3 regions are very specific on what are contained within each. The first one is the forehead. So it's the top of the hairline to the top of the brow line, or like right in the middle of the brow line. Well, thank you for following. And that would be region 1. So not a lot going on there, just a lot of forehead. The second one, this is where a lot of the interesting shapes would be, and this is where I think this can help you with proportions. It's the top of, or it's the brow line to the bottom of the nose. And you can see that here. And the thing that's really interesting, and you can even see with my drawing, I did the ear a little too small. But usually when you take that line from your brow to the bottom of your nose, and if you bring that line to the side of your face, it should equal the same length of your ear, which I always thought was really weird. And I didn't believe it until I started doing some studies and I would draw lines on them. And it's very true. Your brow and nose length, that section there, is the same length as your ear, most likely, or more often than not. I've seen a few that were just slightly off, but for the most part, if you want to draw this middle section, try to keep those features about the same size, and it'll just feel more believable. And the third one would be your mouth and chin area. So even here, I feel like the chin that I drew is actually a little too small. And having this chart with me now, because I didn't do this chart before I did this drawing, I can see that his chin maybe should be pulled down just a little bit more to give it more of a symmetrical region compared to the other 2. And that will happen from time to time where you're drawing, and if you don't plan things out as much beforehand and you don't have a lot of pre-sketch or underlying foundation work, oftentimes there'll be like these little nudges that I will have to go in later and have to correct and fix. So if I was to do a quick drawing of that, let's go ahead. Can you guys see this? Okay. So when I'm drawing my head, talking about that simplified form first with the skull that we created. Like that. So this is generally the shape I try to draw out before I add any detail. It's a very basic shape. And if you want, you can even break it down further from there of like drawing the line of where, if you split it in half, and then if you want to draw the 3 lines, splitting it that way, and then the top of the hairline to there, break that into 3 separate sections. So then once again, that would be the first section, the forehead section. Actually, it'd be a little taller, like right there. And you want these to be pretty equal, remember, these 3 parts here. Second would be your nose and your eyes, which should wrap around into your ear length, which we'll talk about where the ear will be placed later. And the third one, which I guess I forgot to mention over here, would be contain your mouth, and it is from the bottom of your nose to the bottom of your chin. And the mouth should be right in the center of that third one. So the line here would be your mouth line. And another little trick of the trade is your eye line tends to be, if you have your head in profile, once again, and you take the bottom of the chin to the top of the head, if you have a line that is directly in the center of that, that would be usually where your eye would be placed. So that would be called the eye line. Now remember, the 3 regions don't go to the top of the head, but to the top of the forehead. So there's a little extra girth on the top of your head that isn't included. But the girth is included when finding the eye line. So those are something to consider. Okay, let's see. Oh yes, the ear. So where is the ear placed? Well, this goes into the third chart that I'm about to bring out. So these are all horizontal lines in creating the 3 regions. There's also vertical lines which create 3 regions as well. And that would be, let me line this all up. Actually, this should be like that. Okay, let me move it for the camera. So essentially, if you break the lines into vertical ones as well, the ear is placed basically on the back. Oops, I moved the whole drawing. This is the problem with Mylar sometimes. If you have like multiple sheets on top of each other, they'll start to move. There we go. Okay, I gotta hold that one down. There we go. Okay, so the ear is usually placed in between the first 3 region line and the halfway line. And too often the ear, I see people draw it like right in the center of the head, when in reality it should be pushed back just a little bit, like an inch or 2. And I feel like too often when people push the ear forward, it creates this really weird small space in between their facial features in the front and the ear, where it's so smushed that their whole head feels distorted. And you want to pull that ear back. Give this area of your face some room to breathe. And it's a really easy trick to, if you feel like your art is looking smushed, more often than not, it's because your ear is too far forward. So pull it back, even just a little bit can help a lot. And the other thing I want to notice on here is basically, oh no, that was it. That was the main thing with that. So let me pull back our little demo example here. So now if I split the head down the center, and then if I do the same thing we did on that chart, where you take the front of the face and the back of the head and then split that into 3 sections. I would know that my ear would go right here. And you might be wondering, well, how do I know what size that would be? Well, because like what we talked about earlier, it would be in the second region of the face, because that's the top of the eyebrow to the bottom of the nose. And that typically is the same size of your ear, and it would follow that same lines, remember? So remember, your ear will be the same region of your eyebrow down to the bottom of your nose. And I'm going to say that word a lot, remember. So if you get annoyed with me saying that, I am sorry. Okay. And from there, I feel like it's really easy then to place other features, because once you have something set in stone, you can just kind of follow the steps of, okay, now that we have that piece, we can find this piece and place that one. And eventually you'll complete the puzzle. So if we know that the eye line is on this line here, and if we already have the regions cut out of where the nose would be, you can pretty much put the eye, place it down, and it should fit within the region just based on the lines that you've already created. Now, this is another recommendation of pushing the eye a little more toward the front of the face. I mean, give it some room to breathe with, showing some of the bridge of the nose. And this is very much dependent on the character you're drawing. But a typical nose bridge will be pushed out further than the eyes. And the eye socket, if you remember the skull, I feel like I should be working in different colors while doing this. This is why, maybe I should have done this one digitally. That's okay. Hindsight, am I right? So I always think of where I'm going to place my eyeball based on where the eye socket is in the skull. And it helps me create this visual kind of key, and it allows me then to place the eyeball within that socket. So you can imagine like this. And then from there, you just basically draw a Pac-Man triangle mouth, and you'll create an eye. So I'm going to create a very clean version of this as well without the guidelines, and I'll talk about how I do it quickly, kind of with those guidelines in my mind and not having to put them down on paper every single time. I feel like there was one other thing I wanted to explain with you guys. Oh, basically that when you're doing these features, once again, depending on who you're drawing, but typically the nose will breach out further than any other part of the face. And then the brow, where that pushes out, and your lips are generally pretty similar for how far out they are pushed. So if I push the brow out this far here, I'm going to pull out the lips here. That was a low lip line. So usually the lip line is right in the center. There we go. And when I say lip line, I mean where your mouth actually opens. That would be your lip line. Remember what we talked about earlier with don't draw your neck perfectly going straight down. You want it at an angle. And with our little demo head here, and then here, you know what? Here was another thing I forgot with younger artists is usually the back of the neck is too small or it's too large. And like finding that sweet spot sometimes can take a little bit to get used to, but it's understanding that the head needs a visible support with the neck. And you don't want it too small or else it'll look like, if you remember Mr. Garrison from South Park, he has this really giant head and a really like squeezed tiny neck. And it always looks like it's going to bobble over. And you don't want it too thick unless if you're going for a more muscle proportioned character. Because if it's too thick, you might miss the curves of the neck and the subtleties that can be created with it. So I always recommend looking at reference and practicing drawing the neck. Because going back to what we were talking about earlier, understanding the anatomy underneath the neck will really help you draw the neck. And without going too much into neck anatomy, basically there's two muscles that wrap around basically right under your ear. Why, thank you, Raisuji, I think that said. Well, thank you for following. But there are two muscles that go from thank you, Y_U_bully_me for following. There's two muscles that go under your ear and then wrap under your neck and then connect to your clavicle bone right here. And those are very prominent muscles that are very fun to draw. But if you aren't aware of those muscles being underneath the skin, drawing those subtleties to kind of imply them in the drawing would be near impossible. So you'll see a lot of people, maybe not as strong and bold as these lines here, but they'll have that in mind and then they'll do it softly or they'll just shade it ever so softly like imply those bumps and grooves in the skin. And obviously this also depends on the person's body fat percentage and how much is visible on the skin surface versus underneath the skin. Because if you look at a bodybuilder's basically their entire anatomy, it's so tight to the muscle, the skin and muscle, because there's not that much fat in between it, and that's why the veins really pop out too, because they don't have that padding of any fat to be surrounded with. Why, thank you everyone for following. So you can see how I'm not like drawing these very obvious muscle lines. I mean, maybe a little bit there, but by hinting at them, it kind of implies that there's an underlying anatomy. And it always helps. I have this little 3D total musculature that I keep on the side of my desk. I can't show you the bottom half because of, we'll just say, explicits. But I'm going to show you on the side of the face. Actually, I should have been using this the whole time. What am I doing? You can see those muscles I was talking about that start from underneath the ear and then wrap in front and connect to the clavicle. So those muscles are always really fun to draw. And what's great is you see the lines that are underneath them that are cutting almost in a not complete opposite direction and not perpendicular, but at a slight angle. And those you really don't see too often unless if you see like someone singing and they're really belting it and you see some of those muscles and veins pop up under there. And I think one day I will get into drawing anatomy and hopefully share some tips on how to simplify a lot of this, because I think a lot of you out there might be curious about this kind of stuff. But for today, we'll just focus on the face, on the head, and how to draw something in profile really quickly. See that? It's like they're kissing. Mwah. All right. So let's go ahead and start drawing some quicker. I'll do one where I draw some lines, and then I'll go from there and draw one without any lines. And I'll kind of explain what I'm thinking as I'm drawing these things. And the actual statue was bought from 3dtotal.com. And there's a male and female version. Tischel, thank God my dreams were almost crushed. Nope, your dreams are still good and alive. Luva says, are you going to talk about some differences of the face structures between different races? Yes. It was funny. I did this for CG Cookie before, and I got not into trouble, but there were a lot of people that were very, very much aware that this is a very sensitive topic for a lot of people, and you don't want to just stereotype the way someone looks based on their race or based on their gender. And obviously, people will vary, and there's variations between people regardless of gender or race. But if you want to talk about just in general, when you're looking at different facial structures, I'm not going to pinpoint what race they are, but let's say if they have a longer nose, it's very easy, or if they barely have a bridge part where this goes in, you would just adjust your drawing. So instead of it looking like that, actually, you know what? We'll do that. We'll have some variations here. Let's say maybe they're even older. So you have an older, more rigid face. Because like I said, this is a general guideline. Very few people actually look exactly like the general guideline. Some people might have more of an overbite, so their lower half might be more recessed. So you can see here how I'm taking that same basic language, but I'm applying it to more of a real life application. And if this was someone, I don't know why this is like the first one that I wanted to draw out. But you can see there are little things that I did, like the nose and the ear, or I should say the brow line to the bottom of the nose and the ear are the same length. And if I broke this down into thirds, you can see how they're roughly the same size approximately. And that's because I'm still following these general rules, but I'm applying them to different shapes and sizes. So let's do another one. Let's do... So like, let's say, what if they had more of a bubble nose? I feel like I've drawn profiles so often, I tend to just like jump into them. And I may edit on the fly, because I try to work fast, especially when I'm doing these quicker drawings. So in this example, they have a slightly more bubbled nose and slightly larger lips. And when I'm placing the ear, I'm literally looking at where these lines are. And in my mind, I'm drawing like invisible lines connecting them over here. Like that. So same thing with the first one. I feel like that middle section is something I focus on a lot, and I try to make sure that that is even within one another. And let's do one more. Let's see here. Do someone with more like an exaggeration of a nose. I don't know why I'm drawing like this. I feel like immediately I went to like a witch. I don't know why that was my third general head shape. And there are times where the chin might not be as pronounced and their jawline is softer. It creates more of this look where there isn't like a very strong, sharp line defining the jaw. It might just be more like this where it's more open. So, I mean, this is obviously a really big nose, but I tried to then elongate the ear because of that. So usually I'll try to like compensate with things. So if I draw a larger nose, I'll try to have a longer ear. Things of that nature. And if it's a smaller nose, I'll have a smaller ear. And that tends to be true when drawing people, but obviously there's exceptions. Okay, let's see here. Oh, the other thing I guess I should note, if you are trying to discern genders, I know this is something that's very stereotypical as well, but typically when you're drawing a male character, they tend to have more of a defined jawline, and they're more boxy in shape all around, where females tend to be a little softer and more of a flowy shape line. Now, obviously, I'm an artist that likes to play with androgyny, why can't I say that word? Androgynous looks. And I like my girls having more masculine, typically masculine features, and I like my boys to have more feminine qualities to them. I think kind of blurring the lines is fun to play with, and it's kind of boring just playing with what's typical or what's expected. Okay. Next one, Jamie says, one thing I have noticed is how the eye and the pupil lines up with the root of the nose. Oh, you're right. That is something I forgot to mention. And thank you, Tulip Angie, for following. What J Mill is trying to say is, it's like, let's look at this head again. If you follow the pupil, because the head's on a slight angle. So if you follow the pupil of the eye, and if you go straight down, that's usually where the corner of the mouth will be. And actually, that's something if you draw the head in front view, you're going to see my very sloppy construction of a head in front view. So if you draw an eye, let's say it's on this side, the pupil, which would be right here, if you go straight down, should be the corner of the mouth from the front view. Nice little tip that I found out in college. Oh, that nose is way too low. Or maybe the eye is too high. That's what happens when I do quick sketching that is pretty rudimentary looking. But anyways, the center, actually I should have just done it on myself. The pupil of the eye, if you go straight down, should match up to the corners of your mouth. And that is a good little trick. Thank you, Jamie, for reminding me. Carkles Sparkles says, hey, will this stream be recorded? I want to watch it, but I got work stuff and I have to finish right now. Also, I adore your work. AAA. Well, thank you. And yes, I will be putting this on YouTube probably next Tuesday at the latest. Shratha says, if you have a question, please add. Yes, please put @vonart before your question. That way it's easier for me to see it. Because I scroll pretty fast and I look for my little black @vonart box. Luva says, something curious to have in mind when drawing elderly people. The cartilage of both ears and nose is the only part of the face that still grows until we die. So let's draw old people with big noses and ears. I actually did not know that, but that totally makes sense when I think of all the old people I've seen and how I draw them. Even how I draw them with bigger features. And even this first one, it was meant to be an elderly person. And by nature, I just drew it. Well, I thank you, everyone, for following. This is a very follow-heavy stream. If you guys want, I am definitely open to doing more tutorial stuff streams like these. I mean, I used to do these a lot more with CG Cookie, and I'm very comfortable doing it with them. I might stumble on my words from time to time, but for the most part, I have a lot of tips that I would like to share with younger artists in case they just want to know, and I am here for that. So if you guys have any suggestions, I would put them on the Discord community chat, though. That way they're more permanent, where the Twitch one, if I close it, I won't be able to see the comments anymore. But if we have a place on our Discord, maybe one of the mods can, maybe if one of the mods listening right now could quickly create a room that is like stream suggestions, yeah, that would be wonderful, and I would appreciate you more than I already do, which is near impossible. And yeah, I'm definitely open to doing more of these for sure. Cactus says, by the way, who's that with Nate? I will be sharing that later. I don't know if I'm going to finish it today, but this is the next drawing I'm working on to kind of start Nate's chapter off with. And it's something that's very close to my heart, and I'm really excited to be bringing this into the world soon. So yeah, I will not say who it is, but I will say it is someone that is very special to Nate, specifically. Spectre says, will you wistfully do a hands tutorial? Absolutely! I will definitely do a hands tutorial. I am willing to do, like, for me, drawing characters it's not only a comfort zone, but I actually get really excited. Like, for me, this is fun. I like talking about how to draw characters, how to draw underlying anatomy, because more often than not, I learn from it while I'm talking, and usually I have to do research before I do these streams, kind of not only refresh my brain, but just to make sure I'm getting accurate content out to you guys. So yeah, I'm definitely, if we want to see a hand stream, let's set it up for, well, next week is the critique stream, so maybe the week after that we'll do a hand tutorial stream, and I'll go more in depth with how the traditional way of drawing hands are taught, and then I'll show my way of drawing hands. And even though it's not as typical and sometimes not as functional, it allows me to draw hands really fast, and it's something that I will definitely share with you guys. Thank you, Tishel. Mwah. Eva, yes, please do more tutorials, surely about anatomy. The way it is explained make a great difference. Well, thank you. Oh, I'm so glad, you guys. Thank you. I mean, how you explain it's understandable to me. Well, that's great, because then I'll definitely do more of that. Okay. So then let's talk about... Let's say I wanted to draw a character. Oh, and thank you for following. I'll do one more with lines as like one last refresher, and then I'll do the one without the lines, and then I'll explain how I'm doing it. Okay, so when I draw a character, I do start with a very light circle. And even though I talked earlier about how skulls are not circles, I use the circle basically as a kind of a rock that I can build around and I can build on top of. So if I were to then pull our very simplified skull form once again, that. And sometimes I'll even like do a gesture of the underlying skull. And that's why, honestly, I really should have a skull on my desk, because I draw characters so often that I should just have that at reference at any time. So I'm going to do a very light skull drawing. Something like that. Let me look at... Remember the bumpiness in the head. Don't want it to be perfect. And I'll usually make a little indication mark as to where I think the top of the forehead would be. That allows me to then base basically the rest of the lines off of. So when I put in that indication mark of the top of the forehead, immediately then I can think of the bottom of the forehead and place a line there. So now with those two in place, let me go ahead. I feel like I drew these a little dark. I'm going to lift it just a bit with a kneaded eraser. If you don't know what this type of eraser is, it is a godsend, and you should definitely invest in one. They're very cheap. So then I just dab it a little bit and pull up some of the lead there. So now from here, I'm going to break it down into those 3 lines. Where's my Mylar? Which are the forehead, ears, the eye and nose line, and then the mouth line, or the region, I should say. So looking at this, about halfway would be here, which would mean the regions would be about here. Now you should be pretty good at eyeing it. If you want, you can pull out a ruler and you can do this more accurately. But since I'm usually just in like a mad rush of excitement and motivation, I wing it and then I edit as I go, which is not the proper way of doing it and is the way that I always got in trouble in school. So I would recommend you doing the proper way, but I definitely don't follow it all the time myself. Okay, so with these lines set up, from there I can then place a mouth line. I know that the brow will be right there because that's where the brow line is. And then I can then start to, you can see how like with these foundations in place, you can build on top of them and be reassured that these will be accurate and proportional. And oh, the other thing I guess I should do is the top of the head to the bottom, look for the halfway point, which would probably be, let me look at this right there. And this would be your eye line. Because remember, that's from the top of the head to the bottom of the chin. In the center would be your eye line. Create your little Pac-Man mouth. Why, thank you for whoever just followed. And usually the top line of the Pac-Man mouth is a little heavier. And I'll create that secondary fold that the eye folds into. And when placing the actual eyeball, make sure that it's more inset than the upper line that you place here. That way it looks like the eyeball can actually roll, or that the skin fold on top of the eye can actually roll on top of the eye itself. You don't want these two lines at the same line, essentially. Underneath it. So now with my eye set, I can also place my nose. I'm going to do a little bit more of a stronger nose. I feel like since I've always had a very small nose, my siblings would always tell me I had like a pig nose, that my characters tend to have these more softer curved noses. And they say that not instinctually, but unconsciously, we often draw features on our characters that we have ourselves. And I'm definitely aware that a lot of my characters carry the same traits that I do. And I mean, it's either something that makes you uncomfortable or you just kind of accept it and be like, that's just the way that I draw. So there's the nose, and you can see it's the bottom of the nose. So I'm not drawing the nose going way too far down. It's like the very bottom of where the nose starts to bridge out. And then from there, meet up with that lip line. And carry that all the way over into the jaw. And depending on how strong you want the jaw to be, that's how far you want the very point of the jaw would be. Some people have more of an underbite or overbite, and that would push the jaw forward. So we'll make sure that you're aware of that while you're drawing the chin as well. I'll give him just a very normal looking chin. Okay, so now with the facial features in place, you can see if we break this down into the 3 sections this way, see how all the facial features are on that very front line, or that section of the first region. Why, thank you, Spaceman 360, for following. So looking at the facial features, they're actually more lined up in the very first half of the first section. That's how far forward they typically tend to be. Now, there will be times where the eye is more in the center. It just kind of depends on the character that you're working with. For me, this one's eye is a little more pushed forward. Okay, so then with these lines set up, you guys should already know where the ear goes, which is in the second region, but on the right half of that face. I do this jawline way too far deep. It's way too deep of a jaw. I'm at like this angle, so I think from here it looks kind of normal, but then when I look like straight above it, I'm like, oh, nope, that's a little stretched. And then ears I always remember by it being a hook, the letter Y, and then a bump. I did a big tutorial about this on CG Cookie, but essentially every time I draw an ear, I think of the hook, and then the little Y, it's in there, and then there's a bump, which leads into the dark part of the ear. So when I draw an ear, I think of that literally every single time. I'll give him a little hairline here. Going into the back of the head. And usually when I'm drawing someone without hair, I try to make the head just a touch bumpy. Because not everyone has these perfectly smooth heads if you shaved off all the hair. Well, thank you for following. And then like we were talking about before with the neck, I like to keep it at an angle. I like to imply those muscles going around here. There we go. Now, the problem with this is when I try to be too technical, I feel like it loses a lot of the fluidity that often comes with drawing a profile. And for me, drawing, there's like very few things I enjoy drawing more than a good profile, let me tell you. So I'm going to show you how I freehand it and what I'm thinking about while I'm doing that. All right, so let's say I was drawing my character Nate. I do start with a circle even on drawings that I'm more or less freehanding, because that gives me, and I'm going to draw this a little bigger I think too, that gives me a good resting place, not only for the features, but for my eye to then pretty much look at the sizing of how I'm making everything and making sure that's in proportion with one another. I thank you for following. Man, you guys are too kind today. Well, thank you. Actually, no, I don't want to do Nate. I want to do a little bit more of a gruntled head. So even right away, I'm looking at the face and I'm like, this bottom half feels too long based on how big the nose is. So then I would go ahead and try again. Because I'm definitely a firm believer that if you feel like something's not working, don't stick with it because you feel you have to. Redo it right then and there, or else you're just essentially what my old teacher would say is you're polishing a turd. You're literally making something look really good, but underneath it's crap. That's how they would always explain it to me. And I like how that explanation really fits with a lot of art tips. Because I think too often we feel like we're just polishing turds. Now, I'm not one of those artists like a Kim Jong-gi yet where I feel so confident in my ability to draw a profile with pencil that I'm not erasing, I'm never picking up, where he can just kind of go with pen. And I think if I were to do more of that stuff, I don't think I would go for the type of characters that I try to create, which are almost like Final Fantasy-esque type of characters. Because playing with facial features that are a bit more aged or have a bit more character and texture to them tends to be a little easier. And that's why I always catch myself kind of fighting of, well, do I want to draw characters that are just aesthetic, or do I want characters that really seem to have a story behind them? And it can be tough. I have that battle a lot. So something that I normally do is with the eye, I'll usually have a very heavy shadow right under the actual brow. And that allows me then to kind of place shadows based on that brow line, because then I know that it'll be darker underneath. If it's darker underneath his brow, the light source must be from overhead. And that will kind of guide the rest of my decisions moving forward. Usually I like to draw at least somewhat of a prominent Adam's apple. Why, thank you. Slowly but surely, I'm actually turning this drawing into Nate. And then with eyebrows, I tend to like thicker, very bold eyebrows. So usually you will see me darken them and have them be more of a prominent feature of the face. You guys see that all right? And Nate has a bit of a, I want to say more of a a grungier look. So I tend to put a very darker shadow under his eye, almost if there's like this eyeliner that's just been on there for days and it's gotten almost smudgy. And the hair will be pulled back. I mean, hair's a whole nother thing, but for now I'll just kind of block it out in these general shapes. Which I guess if you're drawing hair, just know, even when you're trying to do like more detailed, kind of fine looking hair, having shapular hair will work in your benefit more than trying to draw every individual strand. And it's a lot faster. And actually, to be honest, I feel like the result will feel more realistic than if you try to draw every hair strand. And I'll draw a Band-Aid, because I like to draw a good old Band-Aid on Nate. And I don't know why I made him smiling. He rarely smiles. Oops. Closed up his eye too much there. So basically, if I was to freehand profile, this would kind of be the steps that I would take. Now, drawing each individual facial feature, I feel like, is also a tutorial in itself. So maybe eventually I'll go through each of like how I draw noses, how I draw the eye area, how I draw the lips. And these are definitely things I've done in the past, but I feel like it'd be good for me to update with things that I've learned since my days with CG Cookie, and I feel like I'm always learning something new on a monthly basis with how I draw my characters, and I feel like that heavily influences how I draw them from that point forward. I feel like that was way too much of a sad brow for Nate. Nate has more of an angry brow look to him. Okay, something like that. So that'd be my way of quick sketching a profile. And you can see how much more, I guess, believable this one feels than... See, now even this one I'm looking at, I'm like, that is a little wonk. The top of the head's way too large. But then having a reference, even if it's ones that you created that feels more in proportion, can help you then adjust something that doesn't feel as in proportion. And like here, the mouth definitely feels too long. And if you did your job right, you should be able to look at your drawing and then separate those three values. And when you do that, they should be approximately the same size from one another. And that's how you can kind of tell if your head is in proportion, at least in the region area. And then same with the side view. Now, I do recommend taking a little bit more time learning how to draw the head than just like this really quick sketch thing that we went through, because I think it's good to look at a few different head profiles. I feel like one of my biggest problems in college was I looking at a very similar model for all of my references, and I think that heavily influenced how I drew heads for quite a while. But I think after you start to quick sketch people in real life, you start to pick up little things. And even me, like looking at Norman Rockwell figures and the people he drew, even with old people, seeing how their chin, for a lot of them, were more recessed, and it would push the skin underneath and it would create more of that double chin look, but from the side it would be this little bump. Or even with, let me find my baby drawing. I was drawing this kid and I was looking at a reference of a child in profile, and it became very clear to me how much more pronounced the nose and the lip area was than their forehead and their chin. And the chin was very small. And their head was almost bulbous because of how big it looked. But this reference really helped me see, wow, there's a difference in how I draw traditional characters versus a child, because this region here, actually it is kind of the same even. Look at that. Even with the baby face, it looks like it's not, but it still is, separated in those three pretty much equal different regions. Okay, so we have about a half hour left. So let me open up the Q&A. This will most likely be a little bit of a shorter stream, and I hope that this was somewhat helpful for you. If you guys have any more suggestions on wanting to see me draw something with that is profile related, I am definitely more than open to doing that. Spaceman says, how do you go about aging a face? Does the structure of the face change at all? Oh, here we go. Okay, yes. And thank you for whoever just followed. Actually, the few people that just followed, thank you. I see the jar just filling up with the hearts down there. I want to really quick, who is the #1 country? Okay, so it's America followed by Germany and then England. That is interesting. Very interesting. Or is that Belgium? No, that's Germany. Yeah, Belgium has the vertical stripes, I believe. Okay. So when drawing an aging face, actually, you know what? I'm going to even pull up reference. This is a good example of when you are looking for reference of something that you might not be as familiar with, it's good to do research. I don't think there's shame in recognizing and acknowledging that your skills might not be unlimited, in the sense that we don't know everything. And yeah, we can experiment, we can try, but if we can just acknowledge that we will forever be a student in the art world, it becomes very easy to accept, yeah, I don't know how to draw that. Let me learn how to draw that. Let me find out how to draw that. I thought this would be like really easy to find. I guess this one's kind of good. The main thing that you should think of when you're drawing an elderly person, going back to the piece of advice that I just learned today, that their nose and ears continue to grow even after everything else has stopped growing, is that your skin will tend to start to sag. It's usually because I believe it's the collagen, basically the elasticity, the thing that are making our skin so firm and tight, starts to kind of fade and loosen. So our skin starts to fall because of it. So when you're looking at an older person, and let's say, what's a good example? Let's say I'm drawing my character Grizzy, who's this older woman. I tend to give her a bit more of a bulbous nose for sure. I'll add more wrinkles on the forehead. She's got this crazy wild hair. And then actually for her lips, they're not as like pursed, they're more flat. Then I'll definitely draw the crow's feet. Really accentuate the wrinkle under their cheek, right above their mouth. Well, thank you everyone for following. This is such a... I've never heard that noise so frequently in one stream. I won't push their head out as much. I'll have it more relaxed. In her ear, I'll usually be more droopy. Actually, you know what? I'm going to put her hair in a bandana so it's contained at least a little bit. She reminds me, I mean, she's very much influenced by my art teacher in high school, who was very strong opinionated and a force to be reckoned with, and someone that I'm very thankful for that I got the experience to study under them, because I honestly think they were the reason that I was pushed so hard to better myself. So if there are people in your life that challenge you, try not to take offense to it and realize that they're just as important as the people that are always, there for you and telling you good job and pushing you in a positive way. People that may push you in more of a negative way, hindsight, are probably the people that will make you grow the most. And it's definitely a theory that's challenged by the movie Whiplash. It's like how far is too far for a negative feedback, and being the teacher that wants you to grow, but having to do that means being incredibly ruthless. So anyways, I'm going to focus on these wrinkles. I'm going to add maybe some hints of the wrinkles pulling from the mouth area. Definitely from the side of the face. I feel like there's skin sometimes like pushing back the ear. So I guess imply wrinkles as well. So draw these like little etchy marks. And those will give the implication of wrinkles. That's how I draw my character Grizzy. She's a force to be reckoned with. Next question. Ellen says, not related to art, but is there any really vegan recipes that you could recommend? I'm having some vegan friends over in a weekish, and I'm struggling. I personally do not. I'm horrible at cooking. I'm learning. I'm actually not horrible, but I don't take the time enough to do it. But there was a beet noodle recipe, or actually no, make noodles, but instead of using red sauce, make avocado sauce. That was the best pasta I've ever had, and something that I would definitely recommend. But you have to find it on Google. I'm not sure exactly, but I'm sure if you did like avocado noodle sauce or whatever, you'll find it. Spectre says, when you freehand the head, how do you remember the right proportions? I guess it's from a lot of practice, but any tips on how to remember it? By the way, as always, thank you for the great tips and sharing all of it. So when I'm looking at the head, and if I'm like sketching it quickly, I'm thinking about these lines, but I've done them so many times that I don't have to like break it down to this every single time, that I'm like skipping steps along the way. And that's why when you see masters of art like Kim Jong-gi, or even like Alan Williams when he does his drawings, you don't normally see them do a lot of foundation work. And that's because they're so confident and they're so conditioned to draw these things that it just comes out very naturally. And practice is literally the key word there. Absolutely. Now everyone's looking at the flag chart. It was like, that's a fun little add-on. I found that yesterday and I was like, you know what? I'm going to add that on. And I got rid of those awful circles below. Okay. So I think we're going to end it soon. If you guys have any last minute questions, you can ask them now. But just to recap really quick, I think the most important things when learning to draw people in profile are understanding the underlying anatomy and the bone structure. If you can draw a simplified skeleton, you can draw any character in any pose. And then you break it down into the 3 regions while you're quick sketching, which would be the forehead, the ear and nose, or I don't know why I keep saying the ear and nose, the top of the brow to the bottom of the nose, which would also align with the size of the ear, which my Mylar keeps moving, so don't worry so much if it's lining up with the drawing underneath. I gotta be really careful when moving this. And the last one is the mouth and chin. And the mouth should be roughly in the middle or slightly above the middle in terms of the placement of the mouth. And the eye will fall halfway between the top of the head and the bottom of the chin, right in the dead center. If you do draw a straight line, that's where your eye will be. And then when you do your vertical lines, the biggest thing to remember is when you draw the head, if you cut it in half, the ear should fall on the back half, not on the front half. And that's where you get the smush face syndrome. So you want to focus more on the back half of the center region for your ear placement. And then for the front region, your facial features will basically line up somewhere in the center of that region. And that's basically the main tips I look at when drawing profile. Don't draw your head as a perfect circle. Remember it as a skull. And practice, practice, practice. And the more that you do, the more that it'll be really easy to convert them into different features, into different shapes, because people come in all different shapes and sizes, and you want to be able to capture it as well as feel comfortable winging it if you need to create a character, especially if you're going to be drawing this character over and over and over and over again. You want to capture their likeness each time. Oh, where was that one? I just missed that one question. Ella says, how do you go about the same face syndrome? This is a really interesting thing because it definitely does happen to artists. It definitely happens to me. Definitely happens with a lot of artists that are very prominent in the industry. And I'm not even trying to bash it, because I think in some ways it showcases a style, but I think it also, it creates this weird illusion of it not being so directly connected to people that we know, or like people that are very easy to point out. I think having a vagueness to the face can oftentimes create more of a fantastical feel to them, so they feel less like earthling people and more like fantastical people. And well, thank you for following. And that's why when I think of Final Fantasy characters, they all look the same. And this probably gets the most criticism. And yeah, I do think they should mix it up a bit more, especially it being 2019 now. But when I look at the old concepts of the characters, I feel like it was less about the positioning of the facial structures, and it was more about what they were wearing and what role and what class they were in the party that they were traveling with. And I feel like nowadays it's almost more important to point out how different everyone looks rather than how different their roles are. So it is something that is very intriguing. And when I look at artists like Ross Tran or Miles Johnston and all these artists, when they draw their female faces, they look very similar. And even with my characters, I think there's definitely a likeness between each of them. I always think about, am I doing this maliciously? Am I doing this out of ignorance, or am I doing this out of style? And hopefully if the answer is style, then it really doesn't bother me. But if I am doing it because I've never tried drawing any other face, then I think that's a problem. And if I'm drawing this just because I think it'll be the most liked, I think that's a problem too. But if you have same face syndrome, the only advice I can give you is if you feel like it's a problem and if it's bothering you, then you should change it up. But if you feel like, you know what, that's not really the prominent part of the drawing, that's not what I want people to focus on, and I want it to be on other things, then don't worry about it too much. And there will always be critics out there, and there will always be something negative to say about your art. And it kind of goes back, I know this is tangenting a bit, but I think just because I've dealt with criticism so harshly throughout my life with my art, and there will always be something that people will pick on or that will nitpick, from me being in college saying all my stuff looks like Justin Bieber, or it's too feminine, or all my girls are too masculine, and just all together it was very gay. I would get that a lot. There were just things that people nitpick, but often it's because of their taste and their preference. So if someone is telling you or giving you critique that doesn't feel constructive and it feels very taste specific, don't even let it bother you. And I'm so bullheaded, I guess, that I've never really let it affect me ever. And it always just kind of drove me to do more of it just to spite them. Like, I don't know if that's a good trait for me to own up to, but it's something that I'm very aware of and I'm honest with myself. So if someone's giving you constructive criticism, then you should really listen to it, even if it's something that might be more, connected to your art. You might be more emotionally based. That's okay. That will happen. But if it just feels like a taste thing, just shrug it off. Listen to it and then shrug it off. Jim says, did I see Bird Box and what did I think? I did see Bird Box. I thought it was good. Mind you, I was drawing while I was watching it, so I was more or less listening to it. And I thought it had a better premise than a lot of horror movies that are being praised nowadays. Like, I thought it was better than A Quiet Place. I don't think it was better than Hereditary, but seeing the comparisons between Bird Box and A Quiet Place, I think A Quiet Place had more plot holes than Bird Box, but there were some things in Bird Box that were like the child acting where you're just like a little cringeworthy. But I do recommend Bird Box overall because I think it's an experience because I didn't know what I was getting into. Someone just told me to try it out. All I knew that there were blindfolds at some point in the movie. I had no idea it was going to be like this alien invasion type, or I don't even know if they're aliens. I think that's the best part of it is they keep it vague. That was my biggest problem with Hereditary. They kind of spell it out at the end of what's going on, but I like that this movie kept it vague. Pro BMFK says, did you see the new Spider-Man? What did I think? I did see. I'm a big movie nut for those of you who are new to this channel, so I love talking about films. I watch a new movie every day, or at least I try to. And actually, I've been on a documentary fix, so I watched like 3 yesterday that I've never seen before. Anyways, I thought the new Spider-Man, the animation, excellent. I hope more animation studios pick up on that and will kind of push the boundary of capabilities of what animation can do. And I definitely think it's worth the watch. I think it's my favorite Spider-Man movie, I want to say. I think it beats the old Tobey Maguire one for me. I mean, Homecoming was good in the sense that it was very cheeky, and I thought they did a good job keeping it playful, but it felt very predictable, and it was very much like superhero movie cut A, B, C, end movie. Where Into the Spider-Verse at least felt like they were trying to do something different and break out of the mold. But then when you look at the main plot, you're still like, kind of the same. But overall, I still think great movie to see. The animation kept me entertained pretty much most of the film. And I hope we see more animation like that in the future. Sophia says, do you have any tips on how to make a pose less stiff? This is a huge problem for me and it doesn't look natural. You know what? I'm going to hopefully not tangent too much on this, but when I think of poses, mine used to be the most stiff poses ever. And they would literally be like people, kind of like this drawing, just kind of standing, but hands like, like this, or even like in pockets or behind the back. And the way to fix that, you don't have to have like these poses that are super like dynamic and coming at the camera. I mean, you can. But the thing that I've learned is look at artists like Mucha, look at old artists, or even Da Vinci or Michelangelo or Raphael or any of those Renaissance painters. Even though their characters were very still and very much posed, it never felt stiff. They felt like they were posed with purpose. So my biggest advice to you, hold on, I need a drink of water. Sometimes I talk too fast and I need my breath to catch up with me. So when you pose your characters, try to have them be doing something specific. Have their energy from the top of their head down to their toes and down to their fingertips. Make sure their hands are posed in a way that tells a story as well. I think a lot of attitude can be said with your hands. So there's a big difference between, let's say you're doing a standing character. There's a difference between someone just standing like this and then someone standing like, more like this, something a little more fanciful and more posed. And it's way more interesting. It tells a story just with posing hands. So if your stuff is looking a little too stiff, try to loosen up the body. Think of the body as something that is malleable and something that you can pull around and push that skeleton into different poses and really try to get more of a story that's told behind the pose that you're creating. And if it helps, think of like you're being a photographer on like a fashion shoot and you have this model in front of you and you are directing them and you're being like, okay, give me more regal. And you might see like their shoulders pull back. And that creates a whole different attitude than if they're slouching forward. There's a big difference between this and this. And all you're doing is rotating the upper body and it's creating this whole different story that's being told. So remember subtleties with poses and they can go a long way. That would be my biggest advice with that. Zad says, the stream must be goldmine for very beginners. Even I recognize some new stuff. Thank you a lot, Tim. Your teaching method is so good. You know how to teach stuff. Aw, thank you. That means a lot. Burning Skylark says, I often become impatient with my art and rush through it and leave out the time and detail it needs. How do you be patient with your art and how do you know how much time needs to be put into a piece? Well, it's funny. as I was looking at my collector drawing with all the hands and arms and drawing all the keys, you really have to fall in love with the process. If you don't love the process, you won't love creating art. And for me, it's so therapeutic to draw. I get into like a zone and I feel free. I just feel like I'm supposed to be doing exactly this. And this is why I'm alive, you know? It gives me life in a lot of ways. So learning to be patient is something where, oh, actually, no, I have a good piece of advice for this. So you can draw something really simple and it might be received very well on Instagram, because I could easily just draw a female bust with horns and have it do really well, because on social media, people are, scrolling through really quickly. They need something they can digest really quickly and they can absorb. And if it's pretty, even bonus points. So that's how you get likes on Instagram. But do you like it? That's like the thing I wish more artists would ask themselves when they're creating pieces is, do you even like the art you're creating? And if the answer is no, there's a problem there. So even with this collector piece, I knew that it wouldn't be as well received as the prettier stuff that I draw. And mind you, I still have fun with prettier stuff. Like I did this drawing the other day, and yeah, this is still fun for me to do. But I know that this will do better on Instagram than the collector, but the collector I have more pride in. Or even this drawing that I did last year with the 198 animals in one drawing. And I was really proud of it. And yeah, it didn't do as well as the sketch that I did the weekend before, of literally it was a girl just in profile with horns and a veil. And it was very simple, but it was very well received. But I don't do those drawings because it gives me a lot of pride. I do those because they're fun. And usually when I'm behind a convention booth, I'm not trying to do this big elaborate drawing that could get destroyed in the process of traveling. So I do these larger pieces that give me a sense of satisfaction and a sense of worth. And I think I've seen the return on those bigger drawings. So that's how I know the patience pays off. So like I've experienced it, and I think it's hard for me to explain to you that patience pays off, but you have to go through it. And it's something that I could talk about all I want, but unless if you actually do it yourself, you won't feel it. So my best advice for you is to have a larger drawing or something that you're really proud of, even if it won't be well received or liked. If you're really proud of it, make sure you give it the time that it deserves, and make sure that you're falling in love with what you're doing, because those will create the pieces that you'll be most proud of when you're looking back at your life's work. Sketchio said, yes, just talked about the new Spider-Man movie. I just came back from the cinema. Yeah, like I said, I think it's definitely worth watching, and I would recommend everyone to go check it out, because I want that form of animation to even be pushed further. I heard that Sony might be trying to copyright that style, which would be a real shame, because I want to see more movies in that style, but we'll see how that goes. What is stuck to my elbow? Oh, it's our simplified form. I have sticky notes everywhere. I use them all the time. Last one we have is Colbzy says, don't you have a YouTube channel? I feel like I have seen the animals drawing. I do. There's a link below. Actually, Ella just posted it as well. But if you even scroll down, or unless if that link doesn't work, I guess I should double check these links before I'm like telling people to go check them out. No, it works. Okay. But yeah, that is something that you can find there. And along with some tutorials and tips and time lapses and more streams that I've done in the past. Okay. Thank you so much for coming to this live stream. I do these every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central Time. Next week, we'll be doing our critique stream. So if you want to be involved with that, or if you want to listen in, it'll be next week, and you can submit to our Discord community below. It'll be under one of the channels. And the week after that will be the hand tutorial. I'll make sure to make a note of that, so I get prepped for that as well. And yeah, I guess I just want to thank you guys so much for coming. This was a great stream. I hope you guys learned a lot from it. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you next week. And if not, I'll talk to you guys in the Discord. So thank you so much. Oh, Oh, thank you for. Oh, that was really cool for the bits. Man, I haven't seen that animation. That one's a new one. They're just like it's sitting on top of the hearts. Okay, and yeah, this stream, if you missed it or if you want to watch it again, will be up by next Tuesday. Okay, take care, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Bye, 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 bye.